Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Ellensburg, Washington, USA. Thank you for joining us today for session L, Mojave BC, and we'll have two guests, Kirsten Sauer and Stacia Gordon. The local time is 1:47 p.m. Pacific time, and we will begin our program at 2 o'clock. About 13 minutes from now, I suppose, something like that. And we're live here with more than 200 people, and a bunch of folks will trickle in here, and we'll say hi to a few. And before I forget, let me right away, even before, 5 by 5, good, thank you. This is our last session before we take a 2-week break for obvious reasons. So here we are, Wednesday, December 22nd. 2 p.m. Pacific time of December of 2022, and the next time I'll see you will be 2023, the first Wednesday and the first Saturday of the new year. But we have today's show, and I'm excited about it, and I'm looking forward to learning things with you. That's one of the gimmicks of this show. So let's say hi to a few of you before I email our guests, plural. Houston, Texas, Springfield, Illinois, the Netherlands, hello. Lichtenberg, Austria, hello, Harold. Too fast now. Let me scroll back. So great to have you all. It's always a charge, always a thrill. Now we have more than 360 people joining us. Rogue Valley, Oregon. Rockland, California, Washougal, Washington, Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm back a ways. Bryce is in Tasmania. Hi, Bryce. Probably nice and warm down there. We're pretty lucky here, relatively speaking, in Ellensburg. I think it's 15 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. And I know many of you have much, much colder temperatures than us. So hope everybody's doing okay with the extreme weather that seems to be happening, at least in North America recently. Seattle, Washington, Muskoka, Ontario. Hello, love is the answer. Ontario, Canada. Drain, Oregon. Dallas, Texas. Billings, Montana. It's minus 13 Fahrenheit, but balmy because it's not windy, reports Virgil. Clintonville, Pennsylvania. I'm still back a ways. Edgewood, New Mexico. I think I'm back a ways. No, maybe I skipped down to live against my will. Petersburg, Alaska. Spa, UK, or Leamington Spa, UK, Quilcene, Washington, San Jose, California. Ian is buried deep in the Chuckanut. That could mean about anything. Ian. Selah, Washington, Calgary, Alberta, Waikele, Hawaii, Jefferson City, Missouri. Ellis is from the Netherlands. Kirk's in Philomath, Tacoma, Washington, Twin Falls, Idaho, Moline, Illinois, San Diego, California, Winnipeg, Montana. We're all over the map here. Victoria, BC, El Cerrito, California, Bab, Montana, question mark. It must be colder there in Glacier Country. Clayton, California, Kirk's in Sweden, Ontario, California. Jeff is in Northern Territory, Australia. Kathy has a pleasant morning going in Brisbane, Australia. Have a good one, Kathy. Rathdrum, Idaho. Jason is in Wenatchee. Hello, Jason. Yeah, I mean, it just feels good. It always does. It just always feels good to see you all here. And if you are new to us, welcome, and hope that you enjoy our session today. All right, no screwing around. No, I need to make sure that we are focusing here. Oh, there's people outside of the door. That's a surprise. I thought I was here by myself. Temporarily thrown. I guess I'll just need to ignore them. Okay. Add guest, copy link. Pasting the link to Stacia Gordon. Pasting the link to Kirsten Sauer. And I will trust that they will appear in the green room momentarily. thrown by seeing people out in the hallway. I can't focus on that. Yuki says it's 5 by 5. Hi, Yuki, you're a regular. And there's Kay from Seattle. She's a regular. Pete Peterson, 5 by 5. Thanks for the reports. As soon as I see a bunch of 5 by 5s, I can just stop worrying about that, which is always nice. Seems like in the old days, a couple of years ago, I mean, it was like major, effort just to get the thing functional. So we don't really have that to worry about. Of course, I just jinxed it. Lethal Lee, talk about a regular. Lethal Lee is in Marysville, Washington. Yeah, let's say hi to a few more, and we'll wait for our guests to arrive in the green room. There's nothing else to really reveal, I don't think, except that I really got to concentrate. There's quite a bit of information to absorb today, I think. Kamloops, BC. Troy, Michigan. Kamloops, BC again. Oh, that's Bob and then Pamela. You guys know each other? Grandpa Carl in the Granger Clay Pits. It's been a while since I've seen you here live, Carl. Freebird is not a regular. No, Freebird is not regular. Okay, that's an important key word there. Okay, you're not regular. Got it. Jeff is in Chiclayo, Peru. Hello. Yeah, happy winter solstice. I don't know if you've got some big bonfire to go to or whatever your celebratory things are this year, whatever it is. I hope that you enjoy whatever your rituals are. If you have any rituals, who knows? Carlsbad, California, the Outer Banks in the North Carolina area. That's John. Washington. Sancy, Wales. Hello. Stefano is in Milan, Italy. What's up? Jacksonville, Oregon. Visalia, California. I see Stacia's in the green room. Hello, Stacia. I'm glad that you are with us. That's nice. Kamloops, BC. Joe Slick Live says, hello from Twitch around the world. Love you, Professor Nick. I wish I understood that, Joel. I've heard of Twitch, but that's about it. John says, hello from Ripon, Wisconsin. Marion, Iowa. Columbus, Ohio. Victoria, BC. Rochester, New York. Hello from the Queen Anne Ice Rink, says Lindsay Malone. Yeah, it's backcountry Lindsay. Not a lot of snowplows there in Seattle, so if you're on a hill in a wintry scene in Seattle, it's more adventurous than it is here in places that are more used to snow. Too many words, boy. Too many words. Too many words. Slow it down. Slow it down. Jillian's in freezing Pasco. Now people are saying hi to each other. That's nice. Steiner Offensen is from Bergen, Norway. Hello. Beloved Science says, good evening from Albany-ish, New York. Wonderful. Tucson, Arizona, Richland, Washington, and so on. So we'll see if Kirsten appears in the next few minutes. Otherwise, I'm going to have Stacia text Kirsten. See if we're okay. We have Stacia from Reno, Nevada. I see she's in her office today. And if we can get Kirsten here, she is checking in from her home in Winthrop, Washington, up in the North Cascades, where they have a lot more snow than we have here. Myra, the temperature is okay right now. It's during the week, but the weekends is when they seem to cut the heat. So yeah, semi-reasonable temperatures in here today. Wonderful. I do have the feeling like I'm forgetting to do something here. Hang on just a second. Hang on just a second. I am disheveled more so than normal, but what else is new? There's Daryl in Kansas. Gerald is in Huntsville. Rachel says Winthrop has amazing cross-country skiing. I think our family is heading up there for a couple days after Christmas. That's what I hear. Elaine wants to know, are there any more bread whales today? There's no more bread whales, but let me show you what I have surviving from the last show. So I still have our broken pieces of our whale migrating south before 100 million years ago and then back north. But I didn't feel too badly about breaking that because I think you saw this part that this whale has survived. The stunt whale will be used briefly today, and then we will be bringing this I will be bringing this stunt whale home for our kids, who are no longer kids, but they might enjoy seeing it. I don't know what we're going to do with it after they see it, but anyway, they'll be curious. So we'll use old big mama whale somehow once we get started. Oh, good. I can feel better now. Kirsten's in the green room. That's wonderful. Hello. Nice to have you with us. So we're about ready to get started here. A few final hellos, and then I need to get my head right. So there's Cor in Middelburg, or Middelburg, the Netherlands, and Gary's in Garland, Texas. And Backcountry Gary's with us. He says, hi, Sharon. And Bob is in Wenatchee, and Paul is in St. Louis, Missouri. Hawkeye is in Soldotna, Alaska. Greetings from the Four Arc Basin. Okay, I guess he's a geologist, or she's a geologist. Marianne says, hello, Nick. Well, hello, Marianne. I'm glad you're with us today. Vicky's in Dansville, New York. Tim's in Camas, Washington. More people in the hallway. I guess I need to get some shades on those windows. What is going on out there? Okay, don't focus on it, boy. Don't focus on it. Okay. I think I need 2 minutes to get my head right for today's episode. And so, thank you once again for joining us today, and we'll begin in 2 minutes. Hot mic. Hot mic, 5x5. Technology seems to be okay. Don't think about the technology. Don't think about the people in the hallway. Don't worry about the guests. They're there. It's all concentration on what you're doing for the first 20 minutes. And what is that exactly? Calendar real quick. Papers to look back at the first part of the alphabet. Keep it really fast. 1 to 10 scale. Introduce the topic today. Go to that map on the chalkboard. Use it a lot. Whether you do the whale thing or not, make it fast with the map. Then get into Nanaimo, read one of Danny's emails briefly. Don't get hung up on it. Don't get bogged down on it. Just fly through it. Then start gearing towards the North Cascades and our guests. Set the hook from Alaska to Southern California. Laptop, burn through a bunch of images, and then to Stacia first, and then Kirsten. That's it. It sounds like a lot, but if you go fast, it's not going to take you half an hour. Don't take a half an hour on this. You got 2 guests who are very bright, and they have a lot to share. They've taken time out of their busy day to be with this, so don't hog it. You're setting up the guests. We know you love yourself. We don't need to see that. Just let it flow. You don't know how you're going to start. Just let it flow. Use the papers to guide you. Welcome, everybody. Happy winter solstice, and thank you for joining us here for our last show before the holiday break. We will not be at it again until session M, Wednesday, January 4th of 2023 with Basil Tikoff, and then Saturday, January 7th, that Saturday morning with Bernie Housen. And there is a new paper by Basil and Bernie, and we will be launching into those details, and that will get us rolling with paleomagnetism, which will be a featured portion of January. But we're not there yet. And we do want to really intensely work together to learn what we can before we take a break for the holidays. Talking to myself mainly, but I hope that you can enjoy these two guests as well. We have both Kirsten Sauer and Stacia Gordon with us today, and there are 4 recent geologic papers written by our guests, written in the last 5 years. There is a lot there, and I'm hoping just to whet your appetite so that you have a little bit of context so that as you read those papers more carefully over the break, you can at least have a hope of getting some of it. And maybe I can have a hope of getting some of it as well. To get there, let's realize what we've done in the first part of the alphabet. We started, if you remember, with session A, realizing that Mount Stewart, which is just north of my town, is the centerpiece of this Baja BC phenomenon. And I chose in that session A to focus on not just the Mount Stewart Pluton, but the fact that we had oceanic origin exotic terrains that the Mount Stewart Pluton was invading. The green stuff, the Ingalls serpentinite. The gray stuff, the Chewaucam schist that was brought up kind of out of the blue by Bob Miller in the last show. And the Nason Ridge gneiss, whatever. So there's a lot of oceanic rocks in the North Cascades of Washington. And since we're also realizing now that the CPC, the Coast Plutonic Complex across the border in Canada, is pretty much part of the North Cascades. And our authors, I noticed in their papers, were saying CPC-NC. So they're easily connecting the CPC and the North Cascades together. So there's an oceanic story with a lot of those rocks that may or may not come up today. But the point is, we are focusing in this series, in this alphabet series, primarily between 85 and 55 million years ago, when we take a major mama whale and have her swim north along the coast. You're like, wait a minute, I thought you had a big whale going south. Well, that's before this, potentially, I guess. I mean, we'll get into it next month, but we're not focusing on the whale going south. We're just focusing on the whale potentially moving more than 1,000 miles or more than 1,000 kilometers north during this time frame. And remember, that's the framework for all of this. Our first 3 letters in the alphabet looked at the anniversary dates of some of these key papers. And again, Basil is the next guest coming after the new year. We started session A looking at this very humble little paper in 1972 written by Merle Beck and Linda Nosen, which started the whole thing. Very good. We wrapped up the last show by carefully looking, I don't know about carefully, but we started looking at this paper written 15 years ago, 2006, by Sandra Wild, and she and Paul Umhofer and Jim Wright took all these exotic terrains and restored the strike-slip faults that we know about, including in the North Cascades, where our guests are specialists, and getting those exotic terrains down to Oregon, and connecting the Josephine with the Ingalls and the Klamath with some of the rocks that are now in northern Washington and BC. And there are varying amounts of offset that we are restoring based on whether we're in the Wrangellia part of the scene, the crystalline core part of the scene, or the intermontane part of the scene. These kinds of distances are simply removing the known strike-slip faults that we have. And you might enjoy this one if you haven't seen it. I used this a couple of years ago. So today we have these exotic terrains in the North Cascades, and then crossing the border up to the Coast Plutonic Complex. We do have exotic terrains in southern Oregon and down in California, but if we take the known strike-slip faults and we restore those faults, we can get those exotic terrains that are now in northern Washington and British Columbia at least down to southern Oregon. So that brings up what I want to do first of all on the chalkboard. Let me elaborate. Keep it quick, keep it quick, keep it quick, talking to myself. So I introduced this in our first session, my invention basically, to come up with this 1 to 10 scale. And if you're a 1 on the 1 to 10 scale, you don't want any northward transport along the western margin of North America between 85 and 55 million years ago. Remember, it's been a few shows that we've really laid into that. I mean, I guess we would call that BC. Like it's in British Columbia. It's always been in British Columbia. Let's call it BC. I don't know anybody who's a BC. I don't know any geologist now who's a BC, who's a 1 on the scale because of that Sandra Wild, Paul Umhofer paper 15 years ago. So Paul Link and Brian Mahoney were this, number 3. I'm just making up a number now, 3. They want those known exotic terrains to the north. They want to get them down to Oregon and then have sand depositing into the Nanaimo Basin, which sits on top of many of those exotic terrains. We'll talk about the Nanaimo again today. The title of today's session is Mojave BC. And if you're a Mojave BC person, you want many of the North Cascades exotic terrains in northern Washington south of the Sierra Nevada batholith. You want that stuff in the Mojave Desert of Southern California. I have a map I want to go to. That's a 7. And then if you're all the way up to a 10, you want everything coming from Mexico and going up to the north. Let me finish this little outline that I have for our 2 guests and I'll get rid of it. Yeah, I'm going to ride the Nanaimo pony one more time, man. I've been enjoying the Nanaimo stuff, and there's a little bit of follow-up from the Calgary guys, both Danny and Will, that will feed into today's guests. And then once we get to our guests, I want to learn what I can from them about the old PCers that we have found, that they have found in the North Cascades, and then look to Southern California and see if we can find some of those old PCers down there. You're like, I don't know what old PCers are. Well, you got to watch these shows in sequence. I'll try to fill you in, but it's not going to totally make sense probably for a little while. All right. So you remember 1, 3, 7, and 10. Here's my attempt to do this quite quickly. Blue for the Craton. Blue for Old North America. Blue for rocks that are from the olden days of North America, when the west coast of North America was on this blue line. And going back to the Nanaimo shows, we framed the discussion that there are grains of sand, zircon minerals, that have been debated for a long time, including from our authors today. Did those old zircons come from the Craton? Oh, they did? Okay, well, did they come from the Lemhi subbasin portion of Old North America, Precambrian material, in Idaho and into Montana? Or did those zircon grains, those sand grains, come from the Mojave area of the Old North America? And I'm hitting this hard because there's a potential for confusion today. We're going to talk about schists today in Southern California. The Polona, Orocopia, Rand, and Sierra de Salinas schists in Southern California, just south of the California Triad. That's truly the Mojave BC discussion that we're having today. So the word Mojave comes up too much today. My first major question for our guests, and I don't know the answer, is that the Calgary guys have given up, it sounds like, on the old PC grains, the old Precambrian zircons coming from the Mojave portion of the Craton of North America. For a while they were arguing that, but the most recent paper from the Calgary group agrees that those sand grains came from the Lemhi subbasin. They came from Idaho, and Idaho is relatively fixed in this story. So I'm wondering if our guests today also are now seeing, if they have a strong opinion, about those old PC grains coming from the Lemhi, or if they still want them coming from Mojave. But regardless, I can't help it. I got to cut to it. We've got old PCers from Alaska down to Southern California. We have grains of zircon from the Craton of North America in rocks scattered from the Chugach and the Yakutat all the way down to Southern California. Are they all coming from Idaho? Are they all coming from the Lemhi? The Calgary group is starting to see potentially yes, because of the details of those grains and the rims, the metamorphic rims, the magmatic rims, and so on. Before I leave this map, I guess I can just put the 9 numbers on here. So if you're a 1 on the scale, BC to BC, you don't want anything to move at all. If you're 3 on the 1 to 10 scale, Oregon, California, like Lick and Mahoney, you want these rocks that are up in the CPC and North Cascades down here. If you're like our guest today, and you're a 7 on the 1 to 10 scale, Mojave BC, you want the North Cascades rocks, the Skagit gneiss, the Swakane gneiss, the Napiqua, the Nanaimo, all these rocks that we know and love, and I've been studying as carefully as possible for the last couple of years. You want those rocks down here if they're of a certain age. And you're like, well, how is that even possible? Here's the California Triad that Darrell Cowan kept talking about. And the California Triad looks like this, where we have eastward subduction, and we have an accretionary wedge, and we have a four-arc basin, and we have a Sierra Nevada volcanic arc. Back when this was active, this is this. And the Paleomag and apparently a bunch of other geology says that this is fixed. So how are you even going to move stuff from south of a fixed triad and get it up here? Well, for some of us, that's not a problem because the Basin and Range Province, which has doubled in width in the most recent 20 million years, we need to shrink it by half. And therefore, our roadblock of a California Triad is suddenly further inland. And then we can do some movement north. You want to do it? Is it a big mama whale where we have stuff in Baja and Southern California? Again, we're getting this stuff in here restored back to the time of the mid-Cretaceous, the late Cretaceous, the early Cenozoic time. We knew a big mama whale going up, and the tail is the North Cascades, and the rest of the body is up in the CPC of British Columbia, or do we have a, what is it? What is a bunch of whales? A pod, a school, a gaggle? Do we have a bunch of baby whales making the trip of various distances and a baby fault in between each one? That's something we started to play with last time. Do we have individual blocks with baby strike slip faults, baby beluga in the deep blue sea? Is that more reasonable than one big mama whale coming up through? Okay, now he's pleased with himself, so now he needs to concentrate on what the hell's going on. I'm done with this. I'm done with this. I'm going to the Nanaimo quickly. Now we're doing okay on time. Probably 2:30 by the time I get to Stacia. And then Kirsten shortly after that. Here's me playing with our initial concept of the Windy Pass thrust with the Ingalls moved on top of the Chewaucum and the Mount Stewart batholith coming through. Apparently, this general scene has been repeated many, many times throughout the Coast Plutonic complex. Margie Rushmore, Bob Miller, they've seen this over and over and over again. We have been playing it. We're just playing with it. We've been playing with the idea that all of this stuff is west of a major fault if we still insist on one major mama fault instead of a bunch of baby faults. But the point is, I've put a bunch of old PCers, old blue grains, into these rocks, these metasedimentary rocks, within the Coast Plutonic complex, for today's topic, within the North Cascades. And Kirsten Sauer, with Stacia Gordon's supervision, dug carefully into these bedrock units of the North Cascades and started looking for detrital zircons to see if there's this old PCer signature. I guess I just realized a half an hour ago as I was drawing this on the chalkboard, we really have, and our guest maybe will talk me out of this, isn't this kind of a story of two river journeys? Not at the same time? Don't we have an older river journey from the Idaho, or if our guest instance, the Mojave portion of the Craton, and getting those old PCers away from the Craton and get it west into these rocks of the CPC? And then isn't there a younger river story where we exhume rocks after they've been turned into metamorphic rocks? We originally take sedimentary rocks, we convert them into metamorphic rocks, we high grade in many cases because of those metamorphic rims, and then we get them to the surface. And then we have a younger river story sending the grains even further west into the Nanaimo, but other sedimentary basins, as we'll see today. I don't know why I didn't think about that earlier, but I kind of like that if that's an appropriate way to think about that. Two separate river journeys, and that's not even factoring into the, not even realizing that the details of this are taking zircons and getting them into a magma, and then it comes out, and then it goes back in, blah, blah, blah. Speaking of that, that's what I'm going to finish with here. Done with that. I want to ride the Nanaimo pony one more time because of the fascinating detail that we have learned together with the Calgary group. Those two shows, one with Danny Coots and one with Will Matthews in particular. So we've looked at this for a while. To review very quickly, the two key dates within the Nanaimo are 84 million years ago and 72 million years ago. I'm going to be very interested in hearing what our guests want to say about those two dates within not only the Nanaimo, but within much of the North Cascades. What do we know and what don't we know about those two dates? Why are they important here? Well, graphically, I'm trying to remind you that within the Nanaimo Basin, we start getting the old PCers arriving in spades 84 million years ago. And you're like, wow, really? Up there in BC? No, that's the whole point. Where was the Nanaimo Basin? I'm getting excited now. Where was the Nanaimo Basin 84 million years ago? Was it in BC like it is today? I guess so if you're a 1. Was the Nanaimo Basin in southern Oregon? Yeah, if you're a 3, and so on. Our guests today have evidence that the Nanaimo Basin and many of these other sedimentary basins were in Southern California, the western portion of today's Mojave Desert, the southern tip of the Sierra Nevada batholith. So why 84? Why do those things start showing up from the east, presumably 84 million years ago? And do we think those grains came from Idaho or from directly east in the Mojave portion of the Craton? And then the Calgary guys are wanting specifically to hear about 72. According to the Calgary guys, at least in the Nanaimo, the big pebbles start coming in. The big river cobbles start coming in 72. And another change I think I remember Will Matthews saying is that it's just the southern half of the Nanaimo Basin where we're getting old PCers between 84 and 72. And then 72, we get coarser stuff, and it's basin-wide. So there was just an increase in the flux or the incoming grains coming from this mythical metamorphic / magmatic bedrock source, which the Calgary guys think is completely gone. We did get excited. I got excited last show when Bob Miller thought maybe the Chewacum was the source of a bunch of this stuff based on the exhumation age and the age of the metamorphism. Calgary guys aren't so sure. I've been emailing back and forth with them. I might share some of that before we quit today, but I want to get to our guests. Margie Rushmore, the shore before, I thought she had some metamorphic basement rock up in British Columbia, but the Calgary guys been emailing with her too, and they're less enthused after they hear some details. So maybe we don't have any of that phantom, or if we want a phantom, we want that metamorphic source. Maybe that just doesn't exist anymore. That's where the Calgary guys are starting to think. But I don't want to be so focused on the Nanaimo because I want to see how prolific Or how widespread is this signature? That's, to me, the main interest today. What did Kirsten find? What kind of rocks did Kirsten break open? And how far-reaching has she been collecting personally as well as reading about to see this signature? And does she have rims that are magmatic? She does? Does she have metamorphic rims? She does? In the Skagit, in the Swakane, in the Western Melange Belt. Well, let me get to it. By the way, Will Matthews makes sure that I see that he's actually got some old PCers, Detrital, zircon, with a metamorphic rim and then a magmatic rim around it, like some sort of frickin' jawbreaker. Oh my God. Fascinating and also kind of intimidating. I do this quickly. We go to the laptop and then we go to Stacia. A shock to me after rereading these 4 Kirsten Sauer papers to get ready for today's show is that our Idaho doublet, our old PCers that have those regular dates, do you remember them? 1,700 million and 1,380 million, both Precambrian in age. Those old PCers, they've been found in every one of these units. And I haven't even included up in the Yakutat and the Chugach. I haven't even included the Southern California schists. They all have this old PCer doublet, potentially all coming from Idaho. Why? He goes to the laptop for a very fast-paced run through that stuff, and then we go to Stacia. So nickzentner.com looks like this. If you click on Baja, and I think most of you now have been visiting all of these papers, which is terrific. I'm not kidding now. I got 4 papers for you, all written lead author Kirsten Sauer. So the top one is the most recent. Deep crustal metasedimentary rocks support late Cretaceous Mojave BC translation. And special shout out to Kirsten for her color choice. I love her maps, even though I can't enlarge them at the moment. Yeah. Look at that. So these Southern California schists, the Ran, the Polona, the Orocopia, the Sierra de Salinas, they have a matching zircon signature to the Swakane just north of Wenatchee, Washington. All 4 of those papers are waiting for you. Let me just kind of pique your interest even a touch more if possible. And I think that's enough to get our guests having a sense of where I'm coming from here. So you remember Bob Miller in the last show. Thanks again to Bob. You remember Stacia Gordon? No, you don't. Well, maybe you do from past videos, but she's waiting to visit with us in just a second. Here's Stacia and the rest of the dream team. Bob Miller, Mike Eddy, Stacia Gordon. Yes, we've made the case now, especially with Bob Miller's endorsement, to take the CPC and have it across the border and realize there's a continuation of many of those bedrock narratives into the North Cascades. And we're talking about where was all of this bedrock 85 million years ago. Especially if we undo the offset on the Straight Creek Fault, the CPC is right next door to the North Cascades. Backcountry Gary, shout out. Yes, we did this. I'm not going to do it again. I'm reminding you, Jamie McDonald watches these shows. He emailed me immediately after the last show and said, yeah, you're not mistaken. To make sense of getting this Ingalls up to the north, we have to tuck it into the south of the Josephine. Thank you, Jamie. There was the delivery of the 2 mama whales outside of our house last, whatever that was, Saturday morning, I guess. Here's to the Kirsten maps, which we may or may not use as we talk to her. Slowing down now to see the North Cascades geology Suddenly we're in no man's land. We have no information or very little exotic terrain information. And then here we are south of the California Triad getting many similar rocks. Is that a coincidence? To the North Cascades in the crystalline core, we will be talking about some of these specific units. Here's just a quick glance. Here's the Western Melange Belt near Seattle. Here's the Northwest Cascades system, a bunch of pizza boxes that go out to the San Juan Islands. Each of these are sedimentary basins that Kirsten Sauer and Stacia Gordon have carefully been studying. The Methow Basin, the Swakane that's been offset by the Eniat Fault that Bob Miller was talking about, and the Skagit. So there's plenty of sedimentary rocks surrounding the crystalline core that have possible contributions to our long-distance transport story. I especially like this one because we're literally graying out the stuff that came up the geologic elevator, and we're looking instead at all these case studies with a sedimentary origin. Now, there's more maps, but I don't think do I want to? Yes, just a quick look. So these are from some of these papers by, I'll just say Kirsten, even though it's Kirsten and Stacia together. Here's our friends. So this is a portion of the Skagit Gneiss. Here's the old PCers. Okay, wait a minute now. Swakane, Nanaimo, Western Melange Belt, Methow. We're down in California now, the Franciscan and the Northern California coast, the Great Valley sequence. And you're like, oh, I think you're exaggerating. I don't see the old PCers here. Well, wait. These are looking at detrital zircons older than 86. Ha ha ha. Here are all those bedrock units from northern Washington, southern BC, all the way down to central California with a unmistakable old PCer Idaho doublet, presumably signature. And so Stacia and Kirsten have been doing the same work with individual detrital grains with rims, some of them with magmatic rims. I'm not sure if some of these are metamorphic, ran out of time reading the papers. But this kind of correlation is stretching from Alaska to California. Okay, I think we'll cut it there and we'll see where these guys want to go. 2:30, right on the dot. All right, let me get my headphones and we'll go to Stacia Gordon. Thank you. All right, Stacia, let's see if we can get down to Reno, Nevada. Probably Truckee. No, Reno, Nevada. Stacia Gordon, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Oh, good. I need to switch my camera. Hang on. Okay. All right. Sorry. I appreciate your time, and you have been at this North Cascades game for more than a decade, I know. How many students have you had working with you over the last decade in the North Cascades?
So far, under my direct supervision, two students have completed degrees, and then I have a student who's currently working there, and then another new student that's going to be starting in the fall to take over some of the work in the Cascades and keep going, because clearly there's still lots of unresolved questions.
Well, there are, and with my work with you guys over the last couple of summers, it seems rather focused on the Skagit, for instance, or some other kind of local relationships. Is it fair to say most of those projects have been kind of within the crystalline core, more or less, of the North Cascades?
Yeah, except for some of Kirsten's work where it was necessary for us. I will say neither one of us are sedimentology persons or study sedimentology. So that was a bit of a jumping into different rock types, but was necessary to try to understand what's happening in the crystalline core.
Well, you know, not to set up Kirsten too much here, but it does feel like of your students, she's the one that took local North Cascades geology and just started going more and more regionally. Was that her kind of wanting to do that on her own?
I lost the audio.
Oh no. Oh no.
There we go. No, we're back. We're back. I think it was just a glitch. Uh-oh.
Well,
It's
my
you?
thing crashed. Can you still hear me?
I could still hear you.
Oh, for God's sake. All right. Well, let's hit. What are we going to do here? Let me see if I can bring in. Oh, this is fun. Right before Christmas. Are you kidding me? All right. Kirsten, I'm gonna bring you in, and I'm gonna have both of you guys on screen, and then I'll see if I can restart what I'm doing here, and we'll just have you guys, I don't know. Kirsten, how are you today?
Hi, good. How are you?
I'm doing great. You know what? I'm just gonna play with this for just a second. Let me get this thing hidden.
Uh-oh.
I
Did we
got-
lose them? Oh, you're back.
I got to bring myself back in so you can hear me, but I guess restart. My OBS thing crashed, and yet somehow I still have this going. So let me try to do two things at the same time. Kirsten, this is really funky. Okay, let's try this. So Kirsten.
Oh, lost audio.
At what point did you realize you wanted to kind of go a little bit more regional?
I think I caught the question. I think you're asking about, when we decided we needed to look outside of the crystalline core. And I think part of the reason was we were looking at trying to understand the history of the metasedimentary rocks in the North Cascades crystalline core, and we needed to find potential protoliths for these units and what represented what was buried. And when I started at this time, there was some good data that kind of fingerprinted the potential protoliths, but we kind of were interested in some key units that didn't have a lot of data available that was published. So we started looking at things like the Western Melange Belt, because that's interpreted to represent the accretionary wedge of the North Cascades arc. And we started looking at things like the Nanaimo, but using other people's data for that. And then we did a little work in the older part of the Met Howe, because there wasn't modern DZ data from that. But there's a lot of published DZ from the Met Howe, so we were able to use that. But yeah, when we started getting into this, I heard about Baja BC and all the terrain translation hypotheses, and I was like, oh no, these metasediments could have come from anywhere along the coast of the Western U.S. So that's kind of what started us to branch out.
Well, let me jump in with that. First of all, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm curious about kind of when you started realizing there was implications for Baja BC and if that kind of charged you up. Now, Stacia, you really haven't been that involved in Baja BC literature or research before Kirsten, probably. Is that true?
That's correct. I mean, I knew of the papers in particular of Paul Umhofer's work, and along with Bob and Sandra Wild and many, many others, and especially the PaleoMag data, but hadn't really kind of jumped into it in terms of my own work.
Yeah. And Kirsten, did you remember a conversation at a meeting, or you just kind of stumbled into a couple papers, or did Paul Umhofer contact you, or like him going to realize that you might be interested in being part of this discussion?
I think it was just when we started to, put together the papers, and we had all this data that included the old PC or grains, and we wanted to understand where those were coming from. And so it's necessary to get involved, because there's no source for those locally, so we have to look at what has been proposed previously.
This is great. You guys are doing great. Am I correct that, let's see, in your papers, I'm not sure you said this, but were you assuming that your OPC grains in the North Cascades were coming from the Mojave portion of the Craton or the Idaho, or did you just not want to weigh in on that in print?
I think I mean, I think in the most recent paper we decided Mojave because of the connection with the PORS schists that you mentioned. But yeah, in the previous papers before that, we kind of, left it open-ended because I guess that wasn't really the focus of any of those papers.
Yeah, I would say at the beginning it was just trying to figure out, like, we knew in the crystalline core that there was kind of two different types of metasedimentary rocks. There were the ones that are the host rocks that the plutons intruded into, which are things like the Nipiqua complex and the Cascade River schists that have some metasedimentary components, but they're basically, an oceanic melange that was accreted onto the margin. But then we had things like the Skagit and the Swakan that we knew weren't the host rocks. And so part of it was, are these rocks coming from the west side of the arc, from that kind of accretionary prism forearc region, or were they coming from the back arc? So I feel like that's where it started, and that's where the first few papers came from. And then it wasn't until kind of the later work, and I can't remember, Kirsten, how you started working with Carl Jacobson and Marty Grove, but that was definitely a collaboration that Kirsten started to tie it into those rocks to the south.
Do you remember anybody coming up to you after a talk, let's say, Kirsten, or you put a paper out and you start getting emails from some of these guys who kind of say, hey, you've got some data that is really important? Is that kind of how some of that played out? Yeah,
and I think I'm remembering we had a guest seminar from Marty Grove at UNR, and we met up and talked after that one, just talking about the similarities between the Swakan and some of the schists in Southern California. And then there was a GSA Cordillera section meeting. I forget exactly where, but kind of in the LA area. And I got to meet with Carl Jacobson and Marty Grove, and that's how our collaboration got started. And they were very generous to share samples with us, which we did some detrital zircon analyses and hafnium isotope analyses.
Yeah, so you're not only doing the zircon thing, but you're doing the hafnium thing. So in the Robinson Cecil show, she was trying to help us, and I was a slow thinker, but like the hafnium values and what that means. So was that your call to bring in the hafnium work in addition? Like the zircons weren't giving you everything that you needed and you wanted another method to make some links between things?
So that was Stacia's, included in Stacia's proposal. So for this work, I think we wanted to do the detrital zircon, but we needed some other metrics to kind of compare these units. So we did some hafnium isotopes with the Vervoort lab at Washington State in Pullman. And then we did some whole rock neodymium as well.
Well, I was just blown away by the detail on some of those grains from Will Matthews, for instance, with his depth profiling or whatever he was calling it. And getting all that individual information from the rims. Were you getting down to that level with any of the units in the North Cascades with individual zircon grains?
So we did more of the traditional, like, polish a grain and do a section of the zircon. And we were able to have some zircons that were big enough and had large enough cores and rims, or what we sometimes called mantle zones, that were big enough to analyze with our laser spot, which I can't remember the exact diameter. Do you have that on the top of your head, Stacia?
Yeah, I think we were using a slightly different instrument that's a little more sensitive than what they have at the Calgary lab. So I think Bill had said they go down to, 20 micrometers. And the instrument we were using at the University of California, Santa Barbara, we could go down to 10 micrometers. So it made it easier to access some of those rims. And then as part of our current project, I actually have been doing a little bit of depth profiling on some of the same samples that Kirsten worked on, to try, because all of the grains she found, the metamorphic rims were kind of in that 74 to 65 MA range. And on several of the samples, you can find a much younger rim that's in that kind of during the timing of the youngest magmatic flare up of that 50 to 45 MA. And we could see it in the images that Kirsten had, that on some of them there was this really bright outermost rim that was just too small to do with the conventional polished grains. And so we started doing the depth profiling like Will has, and that he explained.
So you just described, Stacia, like I'm calling him a jawbreaker, I guess. So you have metamorphic rims and then a magmatic rim around it that's Eocene in age?
Yeah, and I'm not sure if it's magmatic. I think it might be fluid related, or maybe another second metamorphism, because like we talked about, I guess in the previous series, that final magmatic flare-up event was quite voluminous, and so it was a large amount of magma being placed into the crust, and so you can imagine that will change kind of the overall temperature of the crust during that time. So you could cause some metamorphism, but then these plutons, when they crystallize, they often release fluids too that would be pretty high temperature fluids, and so that can also cause zircon to grow kind of around the existing zircon that's there.
Well, okay, so man, I've got a bunch of new thoughts here. So you guys can spitball off of any of this if you feel like it, but it seems like there's two things going on at the same time with this work. One is like what I was remembering from the last couple of winters, and you're introducing sediment into a magmatic system, and does the sediment introduction create a big magmatic flare up? And it's all just kind of focusing on a subduction zone scene and how the subduction zone works mechanically with sediment introduction. And then there's this whole other thing that we're doing this winter, which is like, where was this thing and what can we link it to? So before we go to that second part, which of course I'm pretty charged up about, Kirsten, do you remember some specific objectives what was your first field season in the North Cascades, Kirsten, and what were you hoping to accomplish in those first season or two?
Yeah. Just trying to go way back. Yeah, almost, I guess almost 10 years ago.
10 years ago?
Yeah, I think the first field season, we went up with Stacia, and it was a lot of we like looked at the main outcrops and talked about, you know, the work that she had done, and I think we met up with Bob Miller, probably, and we got the full history from him. And I think, was it the first year we went up there? We met up with Joe Dragovich at the Washington DNR. And burrowed around in the Western Melange Belt.
So which units were you first targeting besides the Western Melange Belt?
So I think the Western Melange Belt was one of the only stops on the west side that we did. Yeah, so we were starting to look at potential protoliths. So we collected Western Melange Belt. And then we moved into the crystalline core. And then we also did a little sampling, I think, in the Methow Basin. Stacia, I think I remember that's when your car had broken down, or you had gotten a flat tire and were stuck in Twisp for a week or so. And I think I met you there, and then we looked around there for some samples. But there had been a lot of previously published data from those samples. So I don't think we focused on that basin too much. Yeah.
Is it safe to say that much of that initial work where you're trying to find the protolith for many of these metamorphic rocks, there's an oceanic origin to most of those metamorphic rocks if we go back that far, we're offshore somewhere. Is that a general statement that seems to make sense?
For
I guess
in the crystalline core.
Yeah, I guess so. Stacia, like you feel like if we go back far enough to the early days of the Napiqua and the Cascade River and Skagit, we're out in the ocean, are we not?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely with
So
Napiqua. Mhm.
exactly. Yeah. So those rocks are actually pretty hard to date because of their kind of oceanic origin, is you don't get that many zircons in there. And that was something that Kirsten also impressively was able to date, was to find a few zircons out of there that were Triassic for, I guess, for the Napiqua. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm probably pushing this narrative too much, but I'm just thinking, I'm just imagining that like that stuff you kind of have under wraps after a couple field seasons, maybe 3 field seasons, Kirsten, and then you're starting to see that the data is robust and could be used more regionally. And before you know it, we're getting into these old PC grains and then starting to see the same signatures in so many of the rocks. Like, is it true? I think I just made that list on the board. Like, you see those 2 spikes in the Precambrian with the Detrital zircon. Can you make a list for us? Is it truly Skagit, Swakane, and a whole bunch more?
In the units that we've worked on, definitely Western Melange Belt, Skagit, and Swakane. But I don't think we saw it I don't think it's been reported in the Met-How. Is that true, Stacia?
Oh.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll take that one off the board. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's your lab work. And then you start reading these papers and you're seeing that all the way from Alaska to Southern California, that same signature is showing up.
And I think when that Dumitru et al. Paper came out, I forget what year that was, we were like, oh, yeah, this is our signature that we see too. So we were fitting right in with what people are talking about with margin parallel translation.
And especially one thing I'd add to it that I always thought was really cool and is impressive about all of those sediments and metasedimentary units and that Kirsten saw in the Swakane and the Skagit was that you don't see those old PCers until you get into the samples that have depositional ages that are 86 and younger.
Yeah, there we go.
So she kind of grouped them, in particular the Skagit, into multiple different groups based on the appearance of those older grains.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's the last thing I want to do with you guys, and then we'll open it up to the viewers. But what's so special about 86, 85, 84? Like, it's such a regional story. I should know this because I tried to read your papers, but what have you said in print about the significance of 84 and also the significance of 72? It's not just the Nanaimo, but those 2 numbers are important with many of these units, it sounds like. What?
Right. Yeah, so I guess it's that number. I think in our samples, we start to see the old PCers and rocks that were deposited after around 86 to 84 MA. But it's not just our rocks, it's all along the continental margin. So it's including the rocks in Southern California. And I think for us, there wasn't like a good explanation for where these were coming from. But in Southern California, that's when they interpret that like flat slab subduction was starting. And you had the exhumation of old rocks in the Mojave and the flood of sediment to the west side of the Sierras, the Sierra Arc. And I think was really important for us because we were trying to figure out, are the sediments in the North Cascades crystalline core coming from the fore arc or the back arc? And since we saw all these old grains, we knew that this was a 4-arc / accretionary wedge signature, and that's something that we thought was pretty exciting.
Well, at first glance, it doesn't make a lot of sense that you would have stuff from the east getting to the other side, on the west side of the arc, and get into that 4-arc, and you're just visualizing rivers getting through that arc to get out there.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think originally, you know, there's a lot of work, and people talk a lot about this Shatsky rise that was causing the flat slab subduction in that kind of Southern California area, and that would have caused this breach in the arc and allowed these Mojave grains to get over. I can say, you know, after watching Basil give talks and reading his monster hit and run paper, like now I'm not sure how I feel about the flat slab and all of that kind of interpretation. Maybe it is more of the hit and run story that I found his arguments pretty compelling, or it's definitely worth thinking about. So I think like we definitely know something major was going on at that 85-ish time interval.
Yeah. Oh, this is just fascinating. How about a couple more with me, and then viewers, we're going to come to you in about 5 minutes, I think, if you guys still have a few more minutes to do some question and answer quick. I'm just so proud of myself for getting back on screen. That would have been curtains for me like 2 months ago. I would have just panicked completely. So, all right. Let me, you know what? Improv time. So I emailed Danny Coots and Will Matthews to kind of prepare for this, asking if they liked Bob Miller's Chewacomsaurus and Margie's, whatever, and they weren't that wild about it, but they did have a couple of specific questions for you guys. And I'm wondering if you feel like just kind of rolling with it. Danny says, for the Stacia and Kirsten show, which I'm very excited about seeing, I'm interested in the history of the Swakane and the crystalline core at 72 million years ago. During this time in the Nanaimo, we had a huge influx in big river cobbles and coarse grain depositional event. And I think I remember that's also peak metamorphism of the Swakane and some of the deformation in the crystalline core. What's going on 72 million years ago locally, and do you think that's also some sort of regional story? Either one.
So I think in the Swakane, there's a 72 MA garnet samarium neodymium date. So yeah, agrees with the Swakane being at depth within the crystalline core. And I think it also is a period of magmatism. So thickening of the crust is happening in the North Cascades as well.
And yet there's no plutons cutting through the Swakane.
Right. That's why it's so fascinating.
Yeah, and the same thing with the Skagit, where those are also kind of the time where we see a lot of the metamorphic rims on the Skagit metasedimentary rocks, and then the other main rock type within that Skagit gneiss complex are a bunch of orthogneiss bodies, which are gneisses that have igneous protoliths. So basically we're plutons that have been metamorphosed and deformed, and that's kind of where we get a lot of those ages for that that fit into that middle magmatic flare-up event. And so yeah, we do, like Kirsten said, think that the crust was probably thick, pretty hot, also still in kind of that transpressional regime in terms of deformation. So I don't know with kind of the pulse of magmatism, if you're thickening the crust, if you're increasing, you know, elevation, which generally coincides with increased erosion, if that's what you're seeing with kind of the pulses of cobbles and different things going into the Nanaimo at that point.
Huh. So you guys have not physically worked with those Southern California schists. Like Kirsten, you just collaborated with people who've done the work, but you weren't going down to California, right? And doing more work down there?
Nope. They just sent some samples that I did mineral separations on and sample prep for the zircon analyses. But yeah, one thing I forgot to mention about both the PORs and the Spokane, and I think the Skagit, is that the old PC grains, they have, you know, the younger late Cretaceous overgrowths on them. So we see those and we interpret those to be detrital and not, they're older than the, they're about the same age as the depositional age of the unit. So we had a very, you know, pretty complicated zircon story in these samples. And so we did lots of detailed imaging of the zircons to see the different growth zones. And yeah, we could see overgrowths on the Precambrian cores that were probably not formed, you know, at depth based on the timing. And then there was even younger rims that were related to the metamorphic history of the units. So I just wanted to throw that in there since we see those in the Nanaimo as well.
So Spokane, Nanaimo, that's a pretty good match, it sounds like. Those have to be related somehow. The Spokane and the Nanaimo, that's not a crazy statement, is it?
Right. Yeah.
But
I don't think so.
the same kind of detail is in Southern California as well with those rims, or has not that work not been done yet?
Yes, with the rims.
With the rims as well, I see, with the samples you were sent.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, okay. And that's the whole basis for making this case that those things used to be together. After we're done visiting, I'll go back to a few of your images, and you've got the Spokane right down there in Southern California, right next to those other schists. And it's exciting. You guys handled that one so well. I'm going to do one more. Improv number 2. You ready? This is from Will. Maybe more for, I don't know, either one of you. Will says, I'm also very excited about seeing the Kirsten and Stacia show. I'd be very interested in evidence of melting in the Spokane. The deepest parts of the Chelan block outcrop of the Spokane is known to be full of small 2-mica dikes, I don't know anything about, that intruded into the Spokane from somewhere else. First of all, you guys know about 2-mica dikes that are intruding into the Spokane?
I think I know what he's referring to. There's some that, if I know, there's some beautiful ones right along Highway 97 as you're driving parallel to the Columbia. If you look at some of the outcrops of the Spokane through there, you can see some kind of white rock shooting across those outcrops.
Oh, through the Spokane. Okay.
And those are younger, right?
Because Jenny Matzell had dated those during her PhD work.
Well, that's what Will goes on to say. They've been interpreted, those dikes and sills have been interpreted to be offshoots from a nearby magmatic body that itself was likely a melt formed from the Spokane. What do they mean? Did those magmas reach the surface at 72 million years ago? So he's trying to get to his magmatic rims, I assume. So they're not Eocene? I mean, we know there's Eocene dikes everywhere, but they're not Eocene? These are a little bit older?
Yeah, and there's not, most of the Spokane is very homogeneous, this pretty quartz-rich gneiss. So there's, compared to the Skagit gneiss, which is very migmatitic, where it's undergone this partial melting, you don't see that as much throughout the Spokane, but we did find it in, I guess, one main area. And I did date some of those leucosomes, and I believe they were all like 72 to 68, if I remember correctly. And looking at the hafnium isotopes from those samples, and Kirsten collected those during one of her trips to the Washington State lab. We compared the hafnium from those leucosomes to the Spokane gneisses themselves, and they're different. So we actually think that even what looked like what we call in situ partial melting wasn't, and that it was all melt that had been injected in and then kind of deformed within or alongside with the Swakan gneiss. So it was coming from somewhere else. I always just assume it's deeper, but it's also puzzling because, like we already mentioned, there aren't plutons that are scattered throughout the Swakan. So it's kind of, yeah, it is enigmatic.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Oh, you guys, thank you for being such good sports. I mean, come on, man. I'm just reading you questions from an email. What the hell? So thank you. Viewers, we're coming to you right now. Uppercase, please. And we'll just do this for another 10 minutes or so. And so appreciative of our guests' time. Okay, Papagino says, where do the guests think the 100 million year hit was? California or North? Well, the hit that Basil's talking about is pretty much Idaho and California and Baja. It was a big thing. I don't know if you guys wanted to, like, Stacia, you're starting to kind of carefully think about Basil's paper, it sounds like. But that was
I agree with kind of what you said, is it's a big thing hitting. So it kind of depends on where you want to, what part of it you're talking about.
David Newton says, any idea where the paleo riverine systems were to get the old PC grains so far south? That's an obvious question, but I guess the Calgary guys, they wanted those sands coming down the trench, I guess, as just a thought. Kirsten, do you have want to weigh in on anything there?
Yeah, I'm having a hard time picturing it as well because, I guess the signature is just so widespread along the margin that, having just one river system seems kind of unlikely, maybe. I don't know.
I'd say it's like really tricky. And I agree with, I think it was Will who said, that part of what convinced them that he thought the grains were coming from Idaho is just that you continue to have those old PCers while you're having translation. But then it's confusing, which I agree with, but how, as it's translating, then do you move that source along with it too? Like, I think it's confusing in either scenario of how you can keep getting, it's almost like the source has to be translating along with these rocks, that we keep seeing it appear in throughout the unit.
Yes, and yet, why do you have these old PCers from Alaska to California then? I would expect, I like the idea of the source moving with the Nanaimo or something, but then this crazy range, unless there's all these individual blocks that continue to shuffle the deck, basically. Boy, the more I think about it, the less confident I get. And I don't know if you guys are there or not with that, but I mean, it's almost back to what Margie was saying. Like, it's almost like the zircon is super interesting, but it's not nailing it down the way we were hoping it would. And I mean, great work that Kirsten did, but I mean, boy, I'd love, you know what? Let me. So, do you guys know enough about those Precambrian sources to feel like we should also give up on the Mojave craton as the source of those grains, or you saw enough with the Mojave craton to think that that's still a potential source?
I mean, I guess the one thing that I found hard, if it's from Idaho, from the Lemhi, is why we're not seeing more Archean grains in the signature. Because you do get that from, or you should get that from Idaho. And maybe I haven't done my homework to know kind of how big of, when you think about the detrital zircon spectra, the kind of how it's always presented, where you get these peaks, as to how large of a peak you would expect for the Archean. But it just seemed like, if I remember correctly from Kirsten's samples and that she worked on that had the old PCers, that there was really hardly any Archean grains in there. So that was my only argument kind of against Idaho. And then a bit also the hafnium isotopes kind of seemed like it correlated better with the Mojave source than it did with the Idaho source. But I'm not opposed. I just also find it a little tricky of how do you get all the grains from Idaho all the way down to Southern California.
Yeah.
It's like
totally.
Yeah.
I feel the same way about Mojave versus Idaho. It was, I guess that wasn't really our focus, and
right.
I mean both have some of the right components, so
yeah.
Could be either. But I think with our comparison with the SWOCAN and the PORS, we mostly focused on the similarities in tectonic setting and metamorphic history, and also similarities in their detrital zircon and hafnium signatures.
Kirsten, were you the first to come up with the moniker Mojave BC?
No, I don't think so. I think we had discussed that with like Marty Grove, and I think it had been thrown around before that. Yeah, that wasn't me.
Great. I'm sorry, viewers. Back to you. I'm hogging the time here. John wonders why and how do zircons grow rims? Let's just take it back a little bit. Why are there rims on these zircons to begin with?
That can come just from generally fluids or from melt that kind of globs onto those existing zircon cores, and you have to have zirconium present within those fluids or melt, but that's what can kind of produce that rim on there. So it kind of just is nucleating onto, I think of sometimes as those cores as kind of seeds that are in the existing rocks, and then as you generally also increase the temperatures, that helps as well. And so you get these hot fluids or magma that kind of grow them onto there.
Kirsten, was there a reason you were calling them mantle growths instead of magmatic rims? Was it the hafnium stuff you were seeing?
I think it was mostly the textures that we were seeing in the grain images. So there's a core, and so in some of these cases, it's a core that's Precambrian, the 1.38 or 1.7, and then it looks pretty beat up. It's like a little fragment left, and then there's a pretty large zone around it that has more of like a prismatic form, and then around that there was a rim. So it was kind of differentiating between the outermost growth and then this like bigger mantle or bigger rim, interior rim. It was just sort of trying to have a way to describe it that was easier to track in the paper.
Amazing, amazing detail. All you guys doing that, I just can't believe you're getting that amount of information from that tiny little thing. It's just crazy to me. David, could the SWOCAN be traveling along with the insular, shedding zircons as it moves north?
It could definitely be traveling along, but for most of that time, it was still at depth.
Yes.
Because we know it was still metamorphosing until 65 MA at these, what we call upper amphibolite facies conditions at like kind of 35, 40 kilometers depth, or even thicker, actually. Sorry, I was thinking of the Skagit, where the SWOCAN gives these pressures of 10 to 12 kilobars.
You know what? Let's finish with that, you guys. My question, hogging it again. So, I mean, the date of getting this stuff back to the surface is a pretty big deal, right? If we're talking about getting stuff into a river system, we got to be back at the surface. And if I've learned nothing else from you, Stacia, and others in the crystalline core work, we're not getting the Skagit or the Swakane up to the surface until 50 million years ago, which is after Baja BC transport, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Correct. Yeah.
So which of any of these units that Kirsten has worked with are potentially up to the surface, exhumed, and potentially moved by rivers during Baja BC time? Any of them?
No, I think it goes back to Bob's suggestion of the Chewacum.
The Chewacum. Yeah, something in that Wenatchee block, but or maybe he meant the Chelan block side. I don't know. I mean, I'm missing a couple pieces there, I think, but like that exhumation thing is just as important as making the rims or the magmatic cores or anything else. Like, it doesn't matter if it's still down there, right? We got to get it back up to the surface to have a regional story, I think.
Yeah, and the current grant that I have with Bob and Mike Eddy, that is something that we have funding, is to do more of this argon thermochronology, which tells us about losing a headphone, the elevator shooting up to the surface, or when these rocks are at least are cooling through around 300-degree temperatures.
Well, thank you both. And Kirsten, I want to finish with you just asking, like, are we going to look for more papers from you, or are you done with this kind of academic work with this North Cascades research?
It's hard to say. I don't really know. Right now, I'm kind of in transition. I was working at Los Alamos National Laboratory, and now I'm taking a little break. And yeah, I don't know where I'm going to go. So maybe some more academic work, or maybe do something completely different. I haven't really thought about it yet.
Well, I mean, selfishly, I hope you keep doing what you were doing. That was, I mean, 4 major papers in 5 years. I mean, everybody I've talked to in the North Cascades brings your name up, and I'm like, oh my God, who is this person? So would love to see more, but understand if you go another direction. But I appreciate your time so much today, and thank you for that.
Yeah.
And how much snow do you have up in the Methow right now?
Well, we've had snow on the ground since early November, and we just got about a foot yesterday. More in this forecast. But yeah, I just have to say that Stacia is just such an incredible advisor, and I wouldn't have been able to do all those papers without her and her extremely quick turnarounds with edits. And she's just, helped me grow so much as a writer. So I think Stacia deserves a lot of credit for those papers too.
Excellent.
And Kirsten was an amazing student. Sorry, we are just going to take up a bunch of time praising each other.
I mean, yeah, you guys did an amazing amount of work right there. And before I say goodbye, I guess, Stacia, you're hosting a GSA Cordilleran section meeting in March related to some of this translation business. Is that, or there'll be a session devoted to that?
Yeah, but in mid-May, here in Reno. Yeah, it's along with Basil and a bunch of other co-conveners, and we're planning to have a bunch of different sessions looking at all the different parts of the North American Cordilleran from Alaska through Mexico. And one of the things that I think will be quite fun is we're inviting keynote speakers that do have very different views of the margins, and some of them we call fixus. They would be what would that be? A 1 on your scale. And then we'll have another speaker who is a mobilist. And then hopefully a third speaker that's more looking at the margin with potentially westward subduction and kind of ribbon incontinent, Karen Sidlock and others kind of viewpoints. And part of that is going to be a preview. I think you've talked a bit about the Penrose conference that will be in August in Idaho. So it's kind of the sessions at the Cordilleran meeting will hopefully also set up that Penrose meeting for more discussions.
Terrific. And so the section meeting will be kind of private, kind of for GSA members only, basically, I guess. But the Penrose thing, mostly Basil, I think, is pushing for some public, especially before the trip. So we'll make sure that the audience knows about that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's going to be a field trip and hopefully some sessions. And Will Matthews is another co-convener for the Penrose. So hopefully we can get all the conveners on to talk about it too, as maybe even a decompression after the Penrose meeting.
You'll need it. You'll need it at that point. Well, I thank you both so much for your time, especially you, Kirsten, to just kind of pop in and just share your work. We really value both of you, and thanks so much. And we'll talk to you guys again sometime soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Whew. I enjoyed that. I hope you did too. Those were both guests from the University of Nevada, Reno. Dr. Stacia Gordon, still working there, seems to be in the middle of everything as far as I can tell. And Kirsten Sauer, who received her PhD, sounds like a few years ago, and was working for a national lab for a while, and now is ready to move on to something different yet. Very impressive scientists, and so grateful to them for their time. I think I want to go back to the laptop and do a little bit more there, as has been the case lately. And I think I need to check and make sure that we're 5x5 after that debacle. I think I'm going to write my letter to OBS. Dear Mr. OBS, what the hell? Or words to that effect. Are we 5x5? You still hearing me and seeing me okay? And if so, then we're going to the laptop. Thank you. Okay, we're going to the laptop for a little bit, and then we'll finish out with, I don't know, maybe a little bit more of that email thing. That was kind of fun. So I have to admit that I'm still semi-sketchy with some of the detail, but let me go back. Now that we realize a little bit of the background with Kirsten, let me go here. So North Cascades, British Columbia, North Cascades, and here are those two incredible spikes of old PC grains. And I think you heard from our guest today that even though the Calgary group is pretty sure now that the Lemhi, Idaho area is the source of these grains, I'm not sure the gals are that convinced. I think that's what I heard them say. And then, yes, an explosion of zircon grains coming into these basins and these meta-sediments younger than 100 million years ago. Let me try a couple other things. So here's from one of Kirsten's papers, getting the idea that what happens if we have the Chewacam schist, the Mount Stewart batholith, the Ten Peak Pluton, the Napiqua schist, all in the North Cascades of Washington, in here into this over-thickened crust. And then before 81 million years ago, let's introduce a bunch of sediment. And that sediment is Swakane, and I think also Nanaimo. Again, this is, so I'm losing it here. Like, remember, this is potentially a bunch of, if we're younger than 86 or 85 or 84, then we're getting some old PCers from the east into this basin. And then here's the main area, the main time of shoving these grains, whether they're old PCers or younger, into the depths of a volcanic arc, and then this underthrusting business. So the mechanics of this don't make a lot of sense to me. God, it seems like every time I talk to Stacia, I have those questions, and I'm still somehow I'm not seeing some key relationships. I'll keep working on it. This is looking at the Skagit in the North Cascades and the Napiqua. These are all from Kirsten's papers. But this cooling age business, this is when we're bringing many of these key North Cascades units to the surface. And yet there's all these amazing plots that I think you'll be able to understand better than I at this stage. This is from Will Matthews, giving me a sense of an old PC'er core with a metamorphic rim and then a magmatic rim around the outside of that, where there's some partial melting happening late in the game. And the beat goes on. Here's Danny just going by email. I'm not even sure it's worth it. I don't know how to read it. Excuse me. What's the point of this? This is what I wanted to show you. So if there's one key visual, let me go back. I loved our conversation today. I don't know if we landed at the main point of today's session visually for you, but this last major map I have from Kirsten's 2019 paper, I think is the most powerful way to help you potentially see what's up. And so let me slow down and try to help you see that this is the proposed idea, whether you like flat slab subduction or not. There's an argument for the southern tip of the Sierra Nevada. You know where we are now. We're in Southern California. And the Mojave Desert, the western end of the Mojave Desert is here. And here's this Orocopia and Pelona and Rand Schist and the Salinas de whatever. And these guys are so similar, not only in bedrock look, but zircon detail, to the Soakane biotite gneiss, which is today in my neighborhood. I can get to the Soakane in half an hour. I made a bunch of field videos last summer going to the Soakane. I saw the black bear and the whole thing, if you saw some of those. Kirsten's paper is saying, why can't those guys be side by side? And then we have either the mama fault or a baby fault start sending the Coast Plutonic Complex and the North Cascades, including the Soakane gneiss, where today is in Wenatchee, and have it originally down here. And then John Nash, this one's for you. Here's Will Matthews going, well, to do that, to take a portion of Southern California and somehow get it to the north, we need to extract a portion of Southern California, maybe a large portion of Southern California, and get it out of the lineup of kielbasa's. Here, he's extracting it here and getting this stuff on its northward journey. And I say this one's for John Nash because Will Matthews and Danny Coots and perhaps others want a subducting, spreading ridge at this time to start the northward journey. 83, 70, 66 million years ago. Too many plots for my my old brain. I think I'm going to read. Stacia's still there. I'm just going to, even though Stacia's still there, I'm going to read a couple more comments from Will and Danny, just kind of for closure on this first half of the alphabet. I don't know if it's dawned on you. We're about halfway through the alphabet, so we're about to take this break, and I just want to put a couple little bows on what we've been doing together. So I used to do this a lot. I don't do it that much anymore, like reading emails to you, but I cleared it with these guys. It's okay if I share some of their thoughts. So it's so complicated, I don't feel comfortable doing much more in my own hokey style. So let me just kind of read my conversation with Danny and then a little bit with Will, if you don't mind. Danny, is the Swakane and the Southern California schist match unrelated to the Nanaimo story, since you guys are the Nanaimo experts? This is tricky, says Danny. The Swakane is Nanaimo sediment that has gotten subducted / overthrusted and metamorphosed, and I think we all agree on that, Stacia and Kirsten and Will and I. So that's another round of metamorphism for the old PCers. Will has also depth profiled the Swakane. He can't help himself. The Swakane would have rims on rims, and we're unsure what the Southern California schists look like because they haven't been depth profiled. So Kirsten did a fair amount of work on those Southern California schists, but maybe not the depth profiling like Stacia mentioned that she's doing more recently up in the North Cascades. So we're unsure if the POR schists match the sediment that came into the Nanaimo or match the Swakane. Me, is Mahoney right that the exhumation timing of the POR schists is far too young for the Nanaimo? Danny, yes, it's too young. Again, we have invoked that now missing rock unit that would have to come to the surface to get around that. So again, these Calgary guys don't think we have anything at the surface today that was at the surface 84 million years ago when the old PCers started coming in with those rims. Is Bob Miller right that the metamorphic ages and exhumation timing of the Swakane and Skagit are too young for the Nanaimo? Danny, correct. The exhumation is the key part. The exhumation is too young. No detrital old PCers found in the Coast Mountains belt. Batholith? Danny, correct. That's what I understand from those guys. Me, no detrital old PCers found in the Mount Stewart batholith. Danny, correct. That's what I understand from Bob Miller. In reference to both of those two questions and the similar ones, people have looked pretty hard for this stuff in the Cordillera, and we can't find it anywhere, which is why we kind of feel fine invoking a rock unit that got totally destroyed. Why not? Me, do you have a preferred personal story for each layer in the jawbreaker? Idaho sand grain, and then for sure to Southern California, but why? Because the Northern California sediments are down there, right? Here's Danny's reply. I hope this is helpful to you, if nothing else, just to see how these kinds of ideas are thrown around. And whether or not it's in published form, that's obviously what we're doing here, which is like kind of breaking the rules as far as people like sharing their thoughts and not have it officially in a paper. I mean, I'll keep doing this kind of informally with you guys because it's fun. And you get to sneak, kind of peek behind the curtain. I'll keep doing it until for some reason it's a problem. I don't think there's been a problem to this point of me being kind of totally transparent, and these guys have been willing as well. Here's Danny's kind of personal story, therefore, for one little grain in the Nanaimo. And we can maybe do something similar with our guest today. I shouldn't have said that, just for the Nanaimo and those Calgary guys. Idaho is fixed, but the sediment originally comes from there. PaleoMeg says the Baja BC block was down south. There's lots of old PCer grains in California, so it's not a huge stretch in the Fixus model to get Idaho sediment to that latitude. I mean, other than the cobbles, and we don't really have a great mechanism for that, but then again, we're trying to appease a lot of people here. The old PCers, along with some magmatic grains, get subducted and maybe metamorphosed and maybe even melted, not sure, and gain both rims. The sediment could be the same as the Southern California schists. Will would favor that for sure. The metasedimentary rock with the old PCers gets exhumed to the surface and eroded into the Nanaimo Basin starting at 84 million years ago. We see old PCers arrive in California in waves around 84 and 72 million years ago. So maybe they're from this event too? sediment with the same detrital zircon signatures as the Nanaimo Basin gets subducted/overthrusted to become the Swakane, with peak metamorphism at 72 million years ago. I say sediment with the same DZ signatures as, because we would see a big response if the Nanaimo Basin is part of the Four-Arc Basin we see today was overthrust by the Coast Mountains batholiths. So I picture the Nanaimo-like sediment spreading along the margin, a long section, and is subducted/overthrusted. If Kirsten and Stacia are fine with it being subducted, then it can be sediment from the Four-Arc that goes down into the trench. But I think they like the overthrust version for PT reasons. I don't know. Do I do this with Will? I'll do one little section. Will talking now. Hope this is interesting too. I don't know. Did we lose everybody? Are they like, give me a break? You're in the weeds. I can't even tell how many we have. Oh, almost 700. Will, Danny's correct that the depth profiling of the Swakane gneiss samples, particularly samples from the Chelan block, yielded ample evidence of rims that predated deposition of the Swakane protolith. So Danny's likely correct that the Swakane is slop-over sediment from the Nanaimo that reached the trench and then was subducted and metamorphosed again. There is some waffliness on this interpretation, and incorporation of the Swakane through thrusting over the Four-Arc is still being discussed. I have no idea what I'm saying right now. The Leech River schist on southern Vancouver Island is another slop over into the trench from the Nanaimo. It's a thick metasedimentary rock deposited that depth profiling shows contains some of the same. Okay. All right. Before I say goodbye for our long holiday break, 2 weeks, let me remind you that I won't be seeing you until the first Wednesday of January. Can't find my calendar, but whatever the first Wednesday of January is, Basil Tikoff will be our guest. And the first Saturday of January, 2023, Bernie Hausen will be our guest. Those two guys are the co-author of a new, what did Stacia call it? Monster paper. The hit and run redux paper. Will I be enjoying time with family and friends? You bet. But I can't stop, especially in the morning. I like to get up and feel productive for a few hours before everybody else wakes up. And so I will be reading pretty much every morning for the next 2 weeks these things. I will be reading this book that I found online, published in 1964, called Paleomagnetism and its Application to Geological and Geophysical Problems. Author, Ted Irving. We're just playing with it. I will also be reading A Celebration of the Career of Eldridge Moores, special paper 552. I will also be taking a look at Ancient Landscapes of Western North America, a Geologic History with Paleogeographic Maps by Ron Blakey and Wayne Ranney. If you've seen these kinds of maps, I'm going to try to incorporate them a little bit in January and February. And what reading over the winter time at 5:30 a.m. with Bijou the Cat would be complete without the Robert S. Hildebrand experience, Mesozoic Assembly of North American Cordillera, the tectonic setting and origin of Cretaceous batholiths within the North American Cordillera by Hildebrand and Whalen. Those are just two of the many Hildebrand publications that I promised Bob I would learn carefully before his appearance in late January. and I'll be doing a little bit of reading again about the ribbon candy in the lower mantle. A toast to you. Here's to your health on this winter solstice. Gesundheit. Here's to your health. Here's to the health of your family and your friends, near and far, during this special holiday time. Here's to your enthusiasm, your dedication, your commitment to what we're doing here with these live streams. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. I mean that. Thank you. And here's to our guests today, Stacia Gordon and Kirsten Sauer. Thank you, geologists, for your time and energy. Have a good break. Thanks again. I love you. And we'll see you in the new year, January of 2023. Have a good time. Have a good break. See you soon. Goodbye. End stream.